Hi there, and welcome to the Dentro Talent podcast. I'm here with Ken Baxter today, a highly experienced CTO, and we're going to be talking, Ken, about growing pains and the agony that businesses go through when going from startup to scale up or scale up to I guess, maturity. So, first off, Ken, great to have you here. Thanks for spending the time with me.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. Good to be here.
Cool. So, look, I think, as I always ask my guests to do at the start of the podcast, I think it's probably relevant and right just for you to give a quick rundown of some of your experience, a bit of a whistle stop tour of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm a CTO. I've been a CTO for about 13 years. Many years ago, I was a geophysicist. There's the interesting fact of the
Okay.
day. My background is problem solving. I've done that through my whole career. That's what I see a big kind of key element of being a CTO is all about is solving problems, helping founders to grow and scale their businesses. So I've worked with across all kinds of sectors, from retail to compliance to ed tech to logistics businesses. And the theme has always been the same. It's about how do you take a successful startup business that has got customers, often very good customers, very strong blue chip customers. They've got revenue, and now they want to go on that journey of really trying to scale the business, scale their products, scale their customers, usually heading towards some kind of event. It might be going to private equity, it might be going to a Series B, whatever it might be. So that's
Yeah.
where I'm going to jump in as a CTO, is in that part of the business's journey.
Okay. And look, I think you've already talked about that kind of the business needs and solving problems in the business. Um, and I think that's probably one of the biggest challenges for the modern CTO is um, kind of balancing an engineering function, customer requests, product demand, and the wider business. So how do you balance that, and how do you approach that as the CTO?
Yeah, for me, everything starts with the business strategy, and we talk about strategy a lot. And strategy gets
Yeah,
a bit of a bad rap most of the time, and everyone kind of we don't need a strategy or we've got a strategy and things like. But it starts with really understanding what the direction of the business is, what your vision, your purpose is, why you're doing what you're doing. I don't mean we're going to write a 100-page document. I mean, do you actually understand where you're going? And I've met a lot of founders who will either have actually a very clear understanding where they're trying to get to, they just don't know how to get there. And I've met
mm,
founders that are absolutely on a track to growth, but they don't really know where they're going. So to get that whole balance between all of them, you have to kind of at some point distill it down into what are we trying to do as a business in the, let's say, in the next 5 years. Then you have to break it down into what are we trying to do in the next 12 months to something
mm,
that's actually achievable. And that's where I think you start to get into the interesting conversations as a CTO, where you can start to join up. Where's the business actually trying to get to? What are we actually doing as a product and engineering team to enable that? Then you can
yeah,
start to think about all your tactics and everything else you do. But without that direction of where are we trying to get to, even in 12 months, really
mm,
you're going to start sailing into lots of different problems with your teams.
yeah. And is that typically how you would kind of break that down when you look at a business and you look at a team? Is kind of that, okay? What's that? I guess short to medium 12-month term look like, and then what does it look like longer term? So where's the end goal as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We said earlier, most scale ups have got an end goal. It might be an investment
Yeah,
event, it might be an exit of some sort. So you've already got an end goal in mind, and it's having a good visibility of what you think that actually looks like. Great friend of mine works with companies actually um, in not for profits in the kind of charity
yeah,
sector, and he gets them to actually write down what he calls their future story, which I think is a great way to look at rather than think
mm,
about we have to write strategy. What's your future story? Where do you want to be in 3 years' time? What does it look like? What do you want to get out of
yeah,
it personally, maybe as a founder? And having that visibility will very quickly start to give you clarity, not just on what you need to really focus on, but often on actually what you need to stop doing. And that is
yeah.
definitely one of the perils you see of scaling businesses.
Yeah, and I think that was going to be my next question. Is you've made it sound incredibly simple. So where does it fall down? And where have you seen and experienced businesses getting that wrong, and that balance of whether it's strategy and development, or whether it's tech and business? Where have you seen it break down?
Yeah, great question. I've worked with some businesses that have scaled very, very effectively, and I've seen businesses that have tried to do it and they've just failed. And what's interesting is you look at the ones that are struggling, and then you compare them to the ones that are doing well, and every single time you can say, if only you'd done a couple of things 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And the first one of that is always is always strategy. And I don't mean, again, I'm not going to go back to the kind of what's a big strategy. It's simply knowing where you're going as a business. What is your vision? And then for me, there's kind of those four components of strategy, which is about what are the things you need to achieve to meet that? So if you're going to go to an exit in 3 years, what does that look like? What do you need to have done in order to get to that? The second part, which I think is what's missing when you see businesses that are really struggling, is that what's your current state? Where are you really today in being able to achieve those things? You see a lot of companies that are struggling, and their approach seems to be, let's just keep doing more that we've always done, and eventually
Mm.
we'll get our way out of this. And they almost
Yeah.
just keep digging a deeper and a deeper hole they need to climb out of. So I think being humble as a founder, being humble as a leadership team to say, we actually need to stop and we need to really look at what we're doing, and is everything we're doing adding value to really landing us in that place we want to be in 2 or 3 years' time? That,
Yeah.
I think, is something that a lot of companies do well, and a lot of companies are not very good at. It's all
Yeah.
hell-bent on let's keep charging forwards.
Yeah.
Then you can start thinking about what are the tactics we need to do to actually achieve that. Do we need to do engineering differently? Do we need to change our processes and practices? Do we need a different organizational structure? But I think you often see it fall down where businesses start at the tactics. We're not achieving something, we need to change something. Before you start thinking about tactics, have a really good idea of the direction you're trying to go in. Even if it's not crystal clear, having a
Mhm.
vague direction is always going to be better than just jumping on different bandwagons.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked so far about I guess the business side of things, and having that business strategy in place. Looking at it at a more kind of granular level, um, as a CTO, and in the type of businesses that we're talking about here, which are potentially kind of high growth businesses. Um, how do you keep a technology team motivated and driven as you accelerate and grow at probably kind of um, an accelerated rate?
I think to me, so the role of the CTO is a really interesting one. And I think when you look at early stage businesses, your CTO is often a technologist. They're often the
Mm.
brightest technical person in the business, and they need to be in order to get the business to a certain point. As this business starts to grow, that role of CTO starts to change. It's far more about communication and being able to communicate what the business wants to a technology team, and being able to communicate what the technology team is going to do to enable it back to the business team. The board don't want to sit there and listen to you talk tech at them. They don't really care. They want to deliver the business plan. In the same way that engineers don't want you to go and just constantly talk revenue at them because they don't really care. So you have to come up with not just your strategy, but it's the way you're going to communicate to your technology team, to your product teams, to your support teams, whatever it is that you're responsible for. Give them that vision and that passion and that motivation of where the business is trying to get to. So I think the first thing is you've got to be able to communicate. You've got to have everybody on the same page. And often you'll see founders that will talk about the industry they're in, and they'll talk about the customers, and they'll talk about revenue numbers, and they've made an assumption that everybody's got it. And
Mm.
often they haven't, and they don't really understand what they're doing. And a great way that when I've worked with teams in the past, and it's actually one of the first questions I always ask when I join a business, is when was the last time your engineers went and saw a customer? When was the last time they saw their product being used in anger?
Yeah.
Whether it be, I work at the business doing logistics with airlines. When was the last time an engineer went out and watched a plane being refueled using the piece of software that they'd built? And it does
Yeah.
two things. It's giving the engineers and the product teams a real sense of there is a person at the end of this that is you are helping them do their job. But it also gives them a immense sense of pride. They start to
Mm.
join the dots between why are we actually sitting at keyboards doing this and
Yeah.
who's the actual end user. So you start to get some real engagement of why they exist, why we come to work every day. So you've got to have that communication, that passion, that motivation. I think the second thing as a responsibility of the CTO is you've got to build leaders. You've got to build
Yeah.
people in your organization. If you're scaling, you cannot be the only voice in there that's talking about where the business is going. You have to build a leadership team. You have to start to empower people. And that way you're building that culture as well, which is saying, this is what we want to do. I want you guys to go figure out how we're going to get there. I want to trust
Yeah.
you. I want to trust you to actually roll up your sleeves and do it. So you're
Yeah.
putting in guardrails, but you're giving them direction. You're putting in guardrails, and then you're letting them be creative. These are creative people that want to be creative when they come to work.
Yeah. And do you think that's why? Because I've seen it quite often where a real kind of genuine startup will will either bring in external support for the CTO and somebody on kind of a fractional or a consultancy basis to support them as the business grows, or worse, they might replace that CTO. And do you think that's because you have to hire the most technical person, or you have to have one of the founders as the most technical person, but perhaps they don't have the other skills that you've just talked about that a CTO needs in terms of engaging, in terms of being able to communicate, and lead a function? Because, as you've just said, the role almost completely flips, doesn't it? From being technical superhero to business leader, and that's you know it's a very different hat to suddenly have to wear if you haven't worn it before.
Yeah, it is. I think a lot of startup, a founder will be a very technical person, and that's brilliant. And I think it's just making sure that as the business starts to grow and they understand that how that hat changes and the things they're going to have to
Mm.
do, whether they want it or not. I worked for the business a few years ago where there were two founders. One of them was extremely technical. He'd written the original product. He did not want to manage people. He wasn't interested in product, in processes. He wasn't
Yeah,
interested. Fantastic. Great technical guy. Right. You can go to sit and be a great technical guy.
yeah,
So I think the earlier that businesses recognize that they're going to go on a journey and therefore there are pitfalls ahead of them. The journey is not the same. You don't start the world as a startup. And when you're 300 people big, you're doing exactly the same things you always did. It just doesn't happen. And I think
yeah,
most businesses where you look at their successful journey, that CTO has potentially changed in that journey. So I think early on, bringing in someone who can help to guide you on where you're going next, help to say, look, in 2 years' time, this is what you're going to be facing. This is how you can start to prepare for it now. So things
yeah,
like the rise of fractionals in the last few years has been, it's been really significant. 5 years ago, nobody knew what a fractional was. Having a
yeah,
fractional is having somebody who's extremely experienced, who's been there and done it, who's with your business for, however many hours a month you want them, who can advise you and just help you to not fall into some of the traps that lots of businesses just repeatedly fall into. So,
yeah,
get advice early, get people to mentor your CTO. If your CTO wants that role, leadership skills can be learned. They're not, we're not all born with leadership skills. So you can actually get somebody to mentor your current in-house CTO into that more leadership role. And then they will learn if they want it or not and how they
yeah,
need to adapt their behaviors.
yeah. And I think that's a really it's a really kind of important point about growing and developing people. And it doesn't necessarily need to be, an engineer to a lead engineer. It can be almost founder to lead to business leader and people leader, if they're a technical person. And a mentor is, it's probably the thing I hear the most about, successful C-suite people in technology, is that at some point they have been a mentee to somebody else, and they've developed their skill set through that mentorship, whether it's a formal agreement or whether it's, just kind of, oh yeah, I met them at this event and then we got chatting, kind of thing. Just for reference, have you had somebody like that? Have you kind of had mentorship in the past?
I've not, I don't think I've had it in the form of I've had a mentor.
Yeah,
We have definitely had mentors. I definitely worked
yeah,
with leaders who I think coached me without me knowing about it.
yeah,
That's the ultimate skill of I think of a really strong leader, is you can coach
yeah,
your team. They don't know they're being coached. They're developing their skills. They're being challenged. They're being given accountability, but you're giving them guardrails. I worked with a
yeah.
CEO years ago who was exceptional at kind of doing that. I mentor quite a few kind of CTO and aspiring CTOs now. And
Hmm.
actually, I learn as much from them as they might learn from me. They really,
Yeah,
so, because you're having interesting conversations with people about a set of problems that maybe I haven't seen before, but I can start to help and maybe talk with them about where might that problem go. You can sit and prod and poke, which is kind of, I think, what mentors are good at, and just challenge
mm,
people in the way they're thinking about things. And I think the other thing about mentoring is, I would definitely advise people to get a mentor. Don't be afraid to ask somebody in a senior role, or even on LinkedIn, even if you don't know them,
yeah,
would you have a mentoring conversation with me? Because most of us who are in leadership roles, I look back to when I started, my first CTO role. In hindsight, I probably didn't have a clue what I was doing. I would have loved somebody. I'd love to be able to talk to somebody to go, am I being a complete idiot? And they'd have
yeah,
probably yes or no, but they'd give me the confidence to go, right, I can do this. I can try this thing. Yeah, we talk about
yeah,
imposter syndrome. Imposter
yeah,
syndrome is just a human lack of confidence. We all have it. But I think having that mentor will give you that confidence to actually just go and try things out. But they will also, in the same way we've talked about scaling businesses, they can also help you maybe not fall into some of the traps that a lot of people fall into. And maybe we've all fallen into.
yeah, definitely. And look, we've talked quite a lot about, the business strategy, and then at a more granular level, kind of keeping technical people motivated. Um, what happens when the two don't necessarily align? So you've got perhaps a technical team who are on one path, perhaps heads down, doing what's required, and then you've got, um, business on a growth trajectory, and there isn't that communication. And what happens when that kind of falls down? And from your experience, I guess, how do you solve that problem as well?
Yeah, I think it's a real problem. I think that there's a lot of different things that can happen. A common one that I've seen is that technical teams will kind of retreat into the technical world. So they will start to believe, they'll almost, sometimes I've seen to the extent they've almost built an ivory tower and we're not coming down.
Mm.
You tell us what we want, you leave it alone and we'll build it. So that
Yeah.
engagement with the business starts to break. And I think that means that you may have technical teams that become very fixated on quality or processes or DevOps practices or whatever it might be, which are all fantastic things. But if there isn't a real purpose of why are we doing it, how good does it need to be, is it the most important thing to work on, you end up with that kind of disjoint. I've worked with a business where their engineering function was, well, I'd say it's world class. The quality
Mm.
was exceptional. Their DevOps pipelines were absolutely fantastic. They could deploy multiple times a day, and the business hadn't delivered to a customer for about 3 months. And yet there was this disjoint, and no one was solving it. The
Yeah.
engineering team carried on going, "We're doing our bit," and the business were frustrated, and everything starts to fall apart. So I think engineering teams will start to maybe fall back into doing the things they're more comfortable with, which is what you want them to do. but are they
Yeah.
working on the right things? To me, the bit that always seems to glue it together is actually product management. Not just, I don't mean bringing a product manager and bringing a process. I mean, the
Yeah.
business starts to adopt a much more product way of thinking. You think about your customers, what your customers really need, what's the most important thing for your customer. And then suddenly that huge hopper of the founder wants this and customers want that and the engineering team want to build that and the product team wants something else actually has a process it's going to go through where what actually falls out the bottom are the most important things that you're going to build as a business. And I think the game changer I've seen in organizations is when they've really adopted those kind of practices and the product team are actually throwing away far more ideas than they ever
Yeah.
built. And I think when
Yeah.
you've got that, I think you've nailed the art of product management. You're only ever building things that you know are going to add, you're absolutely convinced are going to add really good value to your customers. And you have a process of testing ideas, validating ideas, either, pivot or persevere if you're into kind of lean startup
Mhm.
is an absolutely great kind of phrase. Either keep
Yeah.
doing it because you know it's going to add value or ditch it. I
Yeah.
think when you get to that, that's when you get that alignment comes back together because product management will glue together the technology team and will glue together your business teams.
Okay. And I don't often talk about recruitment and hiring in these podcasts, but what role do you think the hiring process and hiring the right people, how do you think it kind of filters into that in early stage businesses or even kind of scaling businesses?
I think we've talked about two of what I would call the big three. So
Yeah.
people talk about strategy and pod strategies. I think there are three big things that you see scaling businesses do exceptionally well. They're good at strategy, as in they know where they're going, they've got a clear purpose. They're good at product management, they understand their customers. And the third one, which I think is the most important one, is the people side of it. They've got teams that are energized and motivated and are delivering those products. Without the other two, if you just go into we need more people to deliver more stuff, then you'll just get
Yeah.
more stuff and you won't be actually solving your customers' problems. You're actually just adding more cost. You're probably adding a lot more complexity within your business, not just
Hmm.
with technically, but actually in how do you manage all these new people you're bringing in. But if you don't have that clear vision and purpose, the people that you're bringing in, they're not going to stay with you for very long. They're going to be
Yeah.
frustrated as much as your existing people are. Or your existing people are going to get frustrated because you're now asking me to onboard somebody and I don't know what they're here for, or I don't know why we need them, or whatever it might be. So
Yeah.
hiring and growing your teams is absolutely critical. And I think, I've worked with businesses where there has been this drive to, we've got to grow more people, get more people in the door. And actually it's been, we need to stop doing that until we really understand where we're going as a business. Then we can start to bring in the right people and the people that will really add value. But not only that, but we will also have a much more compelling vision and purpose that they're going to get behind. And then you can
Yeah.
start to think about, what are the right sizes for structure of our teams? You can think about, are we organized optimally for where we want to get to as we grow?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and I think from my experience in hiring for smaller businesses, whether they're scaling or starting or whatever it might be, it's that there has to be a technical competency, doesn't there? They have to be able to do the job, but there is more of an emphasis on the right type of people, and where can that person get to? Because one engineer in a team of, I don't know, 50, 60, 70 people, who perhaps isn't on brand, isn't on message, and is perhaps a slight detractor. That can have an effect. But one in five or one in six who's a detractor, and then you can create chaos, and you can end up with fairly disengaged and unhappy people in that engineering team. Is that your experience? Where it's, yes, there's a technical competency element, but there has to be a people element to the hiring in those early stages as well. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Really? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Perfect. So we've talked about some of the pitfalls, some of the dangers, and where things potentially fall down. Are there any other kind of any other mistakes that you see that are kind of regular occurrences in startup and scale up businesses? Is there anything that you can kind of pinpoint and say, yeah, be aware of this or be conscious of making these types of mistakes? Yeah, yeah. So I think just to I guess summarize some of what you've said. I think there's work up front in terms of strategy, in terms of aligning business goals with kind of the technology team, giving them exposure to where the business is going, and I guess being able to spot where that breaks down, um, but also a big point around hiring the right people, and then once you're in flight, being very aware of where the problems are. Is that a fair summary of kind of anything I've missed, or you know how would you summarize it? Yeah, yeah. Yeah, perfect. But Ken, I think we've set the world to rights on startups and scale up technology teams and how best to lead them. Look, I really appreciate you taking the time to have a chat with me. Thank you. Cheers.